right, we are 2 minutes after. We have plenty of content to get to today, and super excited to get to that. So let's go ahead and kick off. So welcome everybody. We'll be talking about visual reporting and insights with BigQuery today. And you may suspect we will start today's session off with a poll just to learn a little bit more about what data visualization and reporting tools you use in your organization today. This will help us as we go through the presentation, just get a better understanding of the audience and how we can maybe tailor some of the messaging to the different tools that folks use. So our options here: Excel, Looker Studio, Power BI, ClickSense, Tableau, something else. There's plenty of tools in the BI space. And I can see some of the results as they're coming in. And just to speak to them, we see a lot of folks using Excel, which is I've often heard referred to as the universal BI tool, Looker Studio, and Power BI, which is great. We've got some examples that we'll share here today. All right, I think we're good on the poll. So while we wait for more results, let's just hop into today's agenda. What you can see is focused on building data in BigQuery to support your reporting needs. So we'll also share recommendations and some additional resources to help you get started in this session. You may know that this is our third in a series of webinars on BigQuery, with our fourth one coming next month, led by Shaznika, on AI-driven data activation with BigQuery and Vertex AI. Wow, say that 3 times quickly. I don't think that I could. Let's talk a little bit about InfoTrust. So InfoTrust is a global end-to-end digital analytics consulting, data governance, and technology company with a broad range of partners. We're a close-knit group of developers, engineers, analysts, and visionaries. And above all, InfoTrust is passionately dedicated to helping companies make better decisions through data. What's more, we don't sell media, and therefore we can be trusted as an unbiased partner whose only goal is to help companies improve and more clearly understand their own marketing data. With that, let's jump into introductions. Hopefully, maybe a familiar face, but I'm Dan Vividelli. I've been in the digital analytics space for roughly 15 years, and with InfoTrust for 6 of those, based in Chicago. I lead the visualization team, which Nina is a part of, and specialize in helping companies make the best use of their data by aligning business questions and outcomes to available data, and often in the form of dashboards and reports. With that, Nina, care to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Nina. I'm a lead data visualization analyst here at InfoTrust. Through my role at InfoTrust, I work extensively with our clients to support the reporting of Google Analytics data, as well as partnering with different stakeholders to making sure that they are able to generate insights that they need to support organizations and their business needs. I'm very passionate about data visualization, and I enjoy working with different people and figuring out the best way to present their data. So I'm really looking forward to be presenting this topic on today's webinar. All right, so with that, let's get into the content here. To kick things off, I will start by discussing the data pipeline options that we have when it comes to working with Google Analytics data. So with Google Analytics, essentially we have 3 different ways or 3 different options to get insights. The first option is using the Google Analytics UI. This is the most straightforward approach. You can get quick access to pre-built reports within the platform itself, and it's really easy to find answers to one-off or ad hoc questions. The biggest downside here is that with this option, there's very limited options to customize your analysis. And occasionally you might start hitting certain limits or thresholding or sampling issues as you're doing your analysis on the UI. The second option is using the GA4 API. So this is where you can get a little bit more customized with the reporting. Basically, any out-of-the-box connector to BI tools like Looker Studio or Power BI does utilize GA4 API as the data pull methodology. The biggest downside here is that with GA4 API, you do still have the limitations of the GA4 API tokens or the GA4 sampling or thresholding limits. And then the last option, which is something that we'll spend most of our session today discussing, is that using GA4 BigQuery raw export. With this option, essentially, it provides you with raw, unsampled, event-based data, which allows you to do deeper analysis. And this option is also something that is most ideal for organization who wants to do more of that complex query or analysis, as well as the ability to integrate with other platforms or other data sources. And here's also just like a high-level general guideline when it comes to, determining which reporting tool is best for your organization's use case. Essentially, your decision should be informed by the reporting or data needs, reporting complexity, as well as the technical expertise within your organization. So for example, if you are considered pretty nascent to analytics, it would probably be best to just start getting familiar with using the report within the GA4 UI itself, using their Explore reports. Within those, you can, get some basic reporting. And if you want it to get a little step further, you can also start using the GA4 API connector to Looker Studio. However, if you are starting to hit some of the limitation within the UI or within the connector, you might consider upgrading to, using GA4 API by building a pipeline between the API to BigQuery. This does require some degree of technical expertise as it requires you to build a node or a Python script to develop this pipeline or automate this data transfer. The other option is, of course, to start using the data from the BigQuery raw tables for more in-depth analysis. And then the other criteria that you should consider when picking a data pipeline is the importance of alignment between the data set and the GA4 UI. One thing to highlight and keep in mind is that the GA4 UI and the BigQuery raw export will not match one-to-one. This is just because they are inherently different mechanisms that process Google Analytics dataset. And there are things that are things like data modeling that are applied on the GA4 UI that isn't necessarily available on BigQuery. So for some organization, it might be better to just rely on GA4 API reporting, since the data will match pretty closely to the UI. And this way, when you're rolling out the report across organizations, you don't have to worry about getting questions from different stakeholders on why it doesn't match maybe their previous reporting when they were using the UI to report the data set. However, if alignment between dataset and UI isn't as important, you can fully rely on BigQuery as it does provide you with that raw data export. And you can, really unlock the full capabilities of reporting using custom queries that best fit your business or reporting needs. With that being said, ultimately, BigQuery is the best option when it comes to creating fully customizable report using the available GA4 raw data points. It's the only option without any limits in terms of sampling, cardinality, data retention, as well as unlimited custom parameters and events that can be utilized within a single table. I do want to flag that there are some caveats here, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is that any modeling or Google Signal data is not really available on BigQuery, since those are uses Google's proprietary modeling methodology, and it can't really be replicated on the BigQuery side. So there are some discrepancy there potentially. And also it takes generally up to 72 hours for the full data set to be available on BigQuery. So when you are doing reporting, the earliest reporting data date that will be available on the dashboard is usually 2 days before or 1 day before yesterday. So some things to keep in mind there. And now that we've, looked into the different reporting pipeline options for Google Analytics, let's actually now look into how to build queries within BigQuery for reporting purposes. And actually, before we get to actually starting building the queries, it's important to first think about the requirements and define what type of analysis or reporting you're aiming for. Some of the common pitfalls that we've seen when it comes to building queries is that sometimes there isn't really any clear direction on how the data will be used, which then results to very inefficient queries that pulls unnecessary data that doesn't really answer any specific business question, as well as inconsistent reporting across the organization. Um, so in order to avoid some of these pitfalls or issues, it's really important to first identify who will be using the report, what type of insights are they actually looking for, how often will they need this type of reporting, and lastly, making sure that there is full alignment between teams and stakeholders so that there is a unified definition on how each data set or each field within the data set are defined. So at a high level, the process of building a query can be broken down into these 4 steps. So first, define the requirements, then look into what relevant data sources are available and can meet those requirements, then start building a query and optimize it, and then eventually visualize them and report on the insights. So again, I do want to emphasize here on the importance of data dictionary, making sure that the organization is aligned in terms of, defining what metrics and KPI are actually needed, what are the events and parameter names that is being pulled or necessary to report on specific interactions, as well as what data sources will be used within the table. This just makes sure that you avoid any questions around what each metrics actually mean, how the report works, and how it's actually capturing the specific website interaction and how it's reporting it. One last thing, again, before we get into the actual queries, is that I do want to highlight the importance of making sure your BigQuery dataset is residing within the same region. Unlike some other cloud databases, BigQuery does not support querying across different regions. So if your data is stored in multiple locations, unfortunately, you do need to transfer them to the same region to perform your analysis. And when it comes to GA4 to BigQuery linkages, you can specify which region it should reside when you are linking the GA4 property to BigQuery on the UI itself. So make sure that the region that you select on the UI is the same region as the BigQuery project, as well as if you're working with multiple GA4 property, that they should all be selecting the same region when you're connecting it on the UI. And again, if it's on a different region, it needs to be copied to the same region, and there's potentially additional cross-region data transfer fee associated with it. So this is something that's very simple and straightforward, but sometimes it gets left out and might cost you a little bit more down the road later on. So yeah, now that we covered the basics, now let's start looking into the actual table structure within BigQuery. When it comes to structuring the data set itself, there's generally a few ways one might approach the table structures. You can either have one large table that serves multiple needs or multiple stakeholder. You can have smaller, more specific tables optimized for specific reports or teams, or you can have the best of both worlds by having a large table that is flattened, that meets the majority of the requirements, but then add layers of views on top of it that meets specific reporting needs. One thing to highlight here is that with the large table, of course, the biggest pro is that it centralizes all of the data points, but it can be costly and slow to query. Whereas smaller aggregated tables is more efficient, but as you are potentially expanding your reporting capabilities, you might need to, do a little bit more maintenance and adjust it further to meet additional needs there. Ultimately, the decision depends on your team structure in terms of what makes the most sense and how much ownership does each team member actually have along the different components of the data pipeline. And one thing to also note here with BigQuery, there is an option to either create a table or a view when it comes to aggregating the data set. A table is essentially something that physically lives on BigQuery that stores a data set, whereas a view is something that can be layered on top of a table. Ultimately, the main decision factor when it comes to selecting a table or a view are these three things that are listed here. So how complex your queries are. So generally speaking, tables are best for complex queries because, again, the data are physically stored after the query runs, whereas views will run the query each time it is being accessed. So sometimes it might result in slower performance, especially if you have a complex query that pulls a large amount of data. So depending on your requirements or needs, you can determine whether a table or a view is better there. The other consideration is how frequently you might adjust the data set structure. So table is best suited for more static data set, whereas views are better for more flexible requirements. So maybe you're still in the earlier stage and you don't really have a set and so requirements yet. It might be better to just use a view again because you can more easily kind of adjust the table structure by using a view instead of a table. And then lastly, with tables, you do have more options in terms of restricting access to certain columns, whereas with views, you can only grant it at the view level. You can't really just share a view, but then hide certain columns. That level of control is only available within a BigQuery table. So just a few things to keep in mind here when it comes to deciding how you want to aggregate the data points. All right, so one of the most important concepts when it comes to working with Google Analytics data with BigQuery is scoping, because scoping basically determines how metrics and dimensions are associated with users, sessions, and events. So if you don't consider scoping when you are structuring your queries, your reports may produce either duplicative or misleading data set. This is especially true because with GA4 BigQuery raw export, the data does come at the event level, or it's an event-based data. So you need to make sure when you're flattening the data, it is flattened correctly depending on what scope of your reporting you're trying to produce. Generally speaking, when it comes to aggregating this data set, we will create a table for each scope. So one table for user scope, another one for session scope, and then another one for event scope. Each table will then have a unique dimension that is used as the distinct key within that table scoping. We'll get into this more on the demo shortly, but ultimately, at the end of it, you will get 3 different tables with its own scope within the project. All right, so with that, let's get into the live demo. We do have a screenshot of a very convoluted session-based scope query here. We won't get this complex on our demo just for time limitations, but this just gives you an idea of like how complex some queries can get when it comes to reporting data with BigQuery. So I will actually navigate to BigQuery now and look into our sample data set. So for this demo, we are using an e-commerce GA4 data set that's available on Google public BigQuery data set. So it's just, again, an event-based data for an e-commerce site. So with this, we probably do want to start creating, again, those 3 different scope tables. So the first scope that I have here is event scope query. So this query will basically flatten the table at the event level. And for this demo requirement, let's say that we just want to get the amount of purchase by device by date. So with this query, we are just pulling the date and then the device category as the device dimension. And then here we are flattening the table by using an unless statement for the event parameters. And then we filter the event name to specifically for purchase. And as you might already know, if you have been following our webinars or previous webinars, we do use table suffix to specify what date range we want to pull the data set from. So for this use case, it is pulling data for December 1st to December 3rd of 2020. So when you run this query, you can see that below is what the data looks like. So this is just for purchase events by device by event date. So this is again, the event count, and then this is the revenue for those purchase events. So this is our event scope table, and then we have another query for our user scope table. So with this, again, the distinct key for user scope table is user pseudo ID. So within the raw data set, there is a field called user pseudo ID, which is where we do the count distinct to calculate the total number of users. So the first two are pretty straightforward. We're just pulling the event date and device category, and then we'll calculate the user number using this formula. So yeah, so this is an example of what it looks like. And then we'll have another table that pulls sessions. So this is our session scope table. One thing to highlight with session is that we do have to concatenate user pseudo ID and session ID. And the session ID is basically something that we pull from the event parameters. Again, this is where we unnest that event params and pull specifically the GA session ID. And then within here, we also need to concatenate the value within the GA session ID with the user pseudo ID to get that unique session ID count. Because unfortunately, the GA session ID isn't actually unique across users. So you do have to kind of tie it with the user pseudo ID to get that distinct session ID as the actual session number. Very similar in terms of, just pulling event and device, but then you have that count of sessions here. And this is what your session scope table looks like. And then outside of that, you can either just, pull all of these 3 different scope tables directly to your BI platform, depending on the requirements. And then within the BI platform, you can either just, use specific table, or you can join it on the BI platform itself. Or if you want to make it a little simpler, you can also create an additional view that basically just kind of combines the 3 different scope table into just like a single view, so that it's easier to just pull a single view instead of, combining and trying to combine 3 different tables within the platform. And then the other thing I want to highlight when it comes to generating these tables on BigQuery is that you do have the options to preview and troubleshoot within the BigQuery UI itself. As you see on the slides here, some query can get really convoluted and complicated. So once you run it, you probably want to, start QAing it and see if it actually makes sense. To do that, you can look at the preview here as one of the options, or you can also click on this button to be able to preview the data on other platforms like Google Sheets or Looker Studio. As a visual person, I generally use the Looker Studio option just because it gives you, again, that visual overview of what your data set look like. So if you click on Looker Studio here, it actually creates like a temporary Looker Studio link. So this isn't actually like a saved file. It just creates like a temporary dashboard that just kind of gives you an overview of what the data looks like. So from here, you can kind of review and see if it actually makes sense, or if the query needs to be further adjusted based on what the data set that you see on this preview. And then the other thing I want to highlight here is that you do have the option to schedule your query because as you are reporting on Google Analytics data, I'm assuming you don't want to have to run this query each time a new data set becomes available. You probably want to automate this process to a certain extent. So the way to do that is first you want to make your table suffix or date selector to be more dynamic, because currently this is still just static and it's pulling this time period. But if you want it to be more dynamic, you can use something like this, where it is selecting data based on, current day minus 2 days. So it's pulling data 2 days prior from today. And it will just, as the day progresses, it will just pull the most recent data. And once you do that, you can set up a scheduled query. So scheduled query is where you can automate the running of these queries that you create. So then on a daily basis, you can name it test. You can, set up what the frequency is with depending on what GA4 data that you use. If it's like a daily export, the soonest it'll become available is on a daily basis. So you probably just want it to repeat on a daily basis. You can then select when it runs specifically, and then set the destination table of the query result. For this demo, I created a webinar, typo, webinar test data set. And then for this one, it's a session scope table. So I believe it's just session table. And then you can select whether you want to override or append to the table. For this query, we probably just want to append it, since we are just pulling the most recent data and just kind of adding it to the existing session table. There's additional option in terms of location type, service account, and then once you kind of fill all of these out, you can click save, and then it will automatically run depending on the frequency that you set here. So yeah, so very handy to make sure that you are getting fresh data set available on a daily basis. And then one thing that I also want to cover when it comes to scheduled query is that you can also use this to separate your queries into multiple batches. So here's an example of, different, like a batch scheduled query for a large enterprise client that pulls data from thousands of properties. One thing to highlight is that BigQuery is a distributed system, which means it can handle multiple queries at once. So having these queries run in parallel, make sure that the compute engine system within BigQuery are utilized effectively. And when it comes to like dealing with large data sets, so for example, if you're working with more than 100 GA4 property combined into a single table, having separate batches of queries running in parallel can help reduce some of the wait times. And then another thing to highlight is that it is helpful to break down the queries into multiple batches when it comes to troubleshooting as well. So instead of having thousands of properties running in a single batch, and then if one of them fail, you have to kind of rerun it for the entire properties, and it will be expensive and time consuming. Whereas with batches, if one of the property within a single batch fail, you just need to run that batch that has like maybe 100 property instead of the 1,000 that you have. So it is very efficient in terms of, or very helpful to batch your queries in terms of troubleshooting and just making sure that it runs more effectively. All right, so now that we have a good overview of how the queries work, how to structure it, and how to automate it, let's get into how we can actually connect it to your favorite visualization platform. So as you've seen on the demo earlier, BigQuery is great for running queries, but there's not much it offers in terms of surfacing insight or visualizing, sorry, I can't speak, data points that answers a specific use case. So once you have the data set available, your next step is probably thinking about how can I connect this to a dashboard. So on this webinar, we'll look into how to connect BigQuery specifically to Looker Studio and Power BI, and what are the options on each platform. And also, just at a high level, this is what the pipeline looks like. When it comes to Google Analytics, basically, you do need to enable BigQuery linkage on GA4. And then the data in BigQuery will be available the moment it is connected or linked from GA4 to BigQuery. Within the BigQuery itself, you'll do the transformation and flattening of the data set and then creating those specific scope table. And then from there, you connect it to the BI tool or platform. Alrighty, so first let's look into how to connect BigQuery to Looker Studio. This one is very straightforward. So here I have a blank Looker Studio report, and then what you do is you just click on Add Data, click on BigQuery, BigQuery, and then there are a few options on how to connect it. First option is you can use a custom query. So for example, this is the project that we have, and then you can actually write a specific SQL query to pull the data set. So in case for some reason you don't have the flattened BigQuery table available, you can actually run the query to flatten the table here. It's generally not recommended to actually run the query or write a very long query here. It might be more useful in case you have a table that doesn't have, if you need to further segment a certain dimension to your liking, maybe there's like a page path dimension that you want to further categorize, you can add a new segment calculation here, but it's generally not recommended to actually try to flatten the table on this view. But it is an option. So this is the first option. The second option is to actually search it here. Oh, sorry. Sandbox. Oh. Click here, and then we look for the data set, and then we pick either the table or the view. So this is the most straightforward option. Let's say we just want to pull the combined view there instead of pulling the specific tables. You can just click that and add it, and it will be available for use on Looker Studio. So very straightforward. The third option that is also available is using data extract. So with data extract, essentially you just pull the BigQuery table that has been added, but then you just use the data extract option, which means that it will only pull the data once to Looker Studio and load it, and then you won't incur any additional costs once the data set is loaded. So this is the most cost-efficient option, but the downside is that it's not as flexible. So if you want to see data for like most recent day or more frequent reporting, this is less ideal because the data doesn't actually update. It just kind of load it once and then it's stored there. So those are kind of the three different options. Going back to the slide here to kind of recap our options. So there is the direct query with raw data, which is the first option where you write the actual full SQL query on Looker Studio. It can be very costly if you try to write that complex query because as you're interacting with the platform, it is going to constantly try to run and pull against BigQuery. So it is not recommended to use this option. The second option is what we most commonly use is to just use a pre-aggregated view connected to the platform. And then this way it will just, select that table. Like whenever whenever you're interacting with the dashboard, it's not running a complex query. It's just pulling data from that table. And then the last option is the most cost efficient one. But again, this is more for like fixed report. Maybe you have like an annual or quarterly report that you don't really update on a frequent basis. You can just do this data extract once and then not have to worry about maybe the query is running against BigQuery and adding up to that querying cost. All right. So that is the connection with Looker Studio, pretty straightforward and very simple. The other option of visualization platform is Power BI. And let's actually look into how we can connect it there. And I actually have a virtual machine running here. So with Power BI, you can connect the data set by going to Get Data, click More, and then there is a BigQuery connector that you can select. And I'm actually not going to go into this too much, but basically, once you connect, it will give you a list of projects and tables, and then you can select specific tables or views that you want to load on Power Query. And what it looks like once you load it is that it will available as different tables within Power Query. So in this use case, let's say we do want to load the 3 different scope table directly to Power BI. So then we have the event table, session table, and user table available within Power BI itself. And then once you load those 3 different scope table, you can then connect it on Power BI through the modeling view. And then within here, you can connect because it does have the date and device as the 2 dimensions that is across the 3 different scope table. You can connect it to the key calendar table that have the date that connects the event date across the 3 different table, and then have another key table that pulls the different variation of device category and connect it to each of the table. So this way, you can then, connect, since those 3 tables are connected within Power BI, you can just kind of visualize it accordingly here. So it's a lot easier, when it comes to transforming or adding that additional relationship within Power BI, just because it has that relationship management or modeling view within Power BI. So you do have more flexibility if you want to load either like the scope table or the view within the platform. Yeah, so one thing I want to cover when it comes to loading BigQuery to Power BI is that there's actually 2 different methods. So as you were actually loading the BigQuery table to Power BI, you will have the option to either do a direct query or an import. So with direct query, the biggest pro is that there is no size limitation. A lot of large organizations use this because they have a really large data set and they don't really want to store it on Power BI itself. And it also have a closer to real time because it's technically just connected straight to BigQuery, and nothing is really stored within Power BI. The biggest cons to direct query is that it can be pretty slow in terms of the dashboard performance, just because as you are interacting with the dashboard, the BigQuery, it is querying BigQuery as you're interacting with the dashboard. So it can also be a little costlier because it is, it's connected live and it's kind of running the query each time. But it is more efficient on the Power BI side since it's not really storing anything on Power BI. It's basically just using Power BI as a way to visualize the data set itself. Import mode is something that we recommend and generally something that we work with because it is faster in terms of the dashboard performance since you are just loading the data into Power BI file or Power BI server. And then once it's loaded, it has some caching mechanism as well. So it is a lot easier to kind of navigate a dashboard that pulls data from an imported BigQuery table. It is also lower cost on the BigQuery side, again, because it is just pulling it once. And then as you're interacting, it doesn't really incur any additional cost. But the only downside here is that it might take up some of your Power BI server storage. Depending on what licensing your organization have, and if this is something of concern, that is something that you should also consider whether you have enough Power BI server storage or license to kind of cover all of your reporting there. So yeah, so those are the options when it comes to connecting to Looker Studio and Power BI. And before we get into the last topic here, I do want to launch a poll. So what data pipeline does your organization use today for visualization and reporting? And I believe this is a multiple choice, so you can select more than one answer. Give everyone a minute. All right. Looks like more than 50% of people have answered this. Awesome. So I'll actually proceed for the interest of time here. So one last topic to cover before we get into Q&A is that there are options to export data from BigQuery to other data warehousing platform. So when it comes to some of the clients or organizations that we've worked with, they generally do have some interest of using multiple or other data warehousing with their GA4 raw data export that they get. And some of the reasons are listed here. But one thing that I want to highlight and what is most common is that a lot of organizations are simply tied to a specific cloud provider and just want to minimize the admin costs that is associated with owning data set in different platforms. In which case, our team actually do offer full hosting of BigQuery if this is a concern of your organization. So if you are uncertain about BigQuery just because of potential additional admin costs associated with it, we do offer the service of kind of fully managing that platform for you. But when it comes to exporting BigQuery to other platform, if that is a requirement for you, generally these are the three platforms that we've encountered, which are AWS, Snowflake, and Azure. And let's look into the different options that we have here. So the first option is usually the most common, which is where you store BigQuery data into a Google Cloud Storage using a Python script. And then once it's on the cloud storage, you'll then set up an export to other data warehouses. This cost is relatively low, especially if you store the file as a Parquet file. You may incur additional costs when it comes to the data that is actually stored within the Google Cloud storage itself. But other than that, it is a pretty low cost option. The second option is something that is becoming more common because direct connectors are becoming more available for different platforms. So there are a few connectors that you can use, like the BigQuery Omni or Google Analytics Reader database for Snowflake that can just directly connect BigQuery to other data warehouses. One consideration here is that depending on what tool you use to connect, there might be additional costs associated with using the BigQuery API. And there might be also some additional costs with like transferring data outside of BigQuery or outside of network or region. So it might be a costlier option, but that is something that you can also consider. Last option, most straightforward, where you basically just do one-time extract of data from BigQuery and then just upload it to other data warehouse. Might be an option if you just want to export historical data set. Maybe for some reason the data that you're pulling is able to go directly to the new warehouse, and then you're just kind of focusing on historical data. Using this last option is probably what makes the most sense. However, it doesn't really work if you want, a recurring export of fresh data set from BigQuery to other warehouses. So here's again another high-level overview of the comparison between Direct Connector and using Google Cloud Storage as the intermediary. Essentially, Direct Connector biggest benefit is that it's closest to real-time data, whereas Cloud Storage does export data on a more batch or scheduled basis. Cloud storage is relatively cheaper from what we've seen compared to other costs potentially associated with direct connectors. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is that cloud storage is more flexible and can easily migrate it to other cloud provider. So if you don't want to be tied or locked into a specific vendor, using Google Cloud Storage might be a better option just because it is more modular than having everything stored or tied to a specific vendor. All right, so with that, just want to quickly summarize a lot of things that we've covered today. I know it's been a lot of content, but when it comes to our recommendation is that a well-structured reporting setup in BigQuery should save time, reduce costs, and making sure that you have high quality data for decision making. And to achieve this, we recommend that you first align with the stakeholders, making sure that you're prioritizing business outcomes and business needs when it comes to determining which data pipelines or BI tools that you should use. When structuring data, make sure you create flattened pre-aggregated table with specific scoping tables. You should also use the ad hoc analysis and validation tools as you're querying the data, using the features that are readily available. For example, using the table preview or the Looker Studio direct connector to BigQuery. You should also consider filtering to only necessary event, as well as use scheduled query to make sure that you are more efficient with your query and controlling your costs. And then lastly, making sure that there is a data dictionary that is being utilized to ensure consistency and full alignment on how things are defined across the organization. Also want to highlight a few bonus tips when it comes to exporting to other data warehouses. Just make sure that you partition query to and avoid any querying of any unnecessary rows. Try exporting in more efficient format like Parquet instead of CSV. You should also consider batching instead of pulling stream data. And lastly, making sure that you optimize the destination table schema. So this will make sure that as you're transferring or exporting data from BigQuery to other platform, that they're actually coming through appropriately. All right. And then with that, I will also launch another poll. I know we've covered some basics there in terms of how to do reporting with BigQuery. Now we just want to check with you. How would you rate your current BigQuery reporting skills and abilities? And I will actually pass it over to Dan.
Great, thank you, Nina. While we wait for those results to come in, a few additional resources that I want to highlight. So in our upcoming webinars, you can join us next month where we will dive deep into the capabilities of Google BigQuery yet again and explore how to maximize its potential for your organization. Whether you're a seasoned data professional or just starting to explore BigQuery, this series will provide actionable tools and techniques to elevate your data strategy. And specifically, we'll cover integrating CRM data for enhanced insights, advanced data modeling utilizing ML and Vertex AI, activating modeled data in Google Analytics for marketing efficiency, and leveraging data for strategic marketing initiatives. Also, I highly recommend signing up for the newsletter to stay in the loop on upcoming events and news articles. And I also posted the link to our resource library where you'll find a recording of this webinar and past webinars that we've had. As well, I would be remiss without mentioning AdTech Unlocked. This event is designed for marketers, data analysts, and privacy professionals, offering expert insights on first-party data strategies, data privacy and compliance, and innovative marketing techniques. Join us in London. Great excuse if you don't happen to live in London to visit, to explore future-proof solutions, hear from industry leaders, and connect with peers. You can expect impactful presentations, engaging panels, and actionable strategies to enhance your marketing resilience and effectiveness in a rapidly changing landscape. And to highlight it just one last time, the resource library is where you'll find a recording of this webinar and past webinars and other articles that we've published. With that, we have one more poll. I promise this is our last one. And we'll let this one run. I know we've gotten some great feedback in the chat, so appreciate everyone's comments there. A couple questions. And so probably good for us to hop into QA right now while we've got our expert, Nina, here to talk to. One question that came up was around the data dictionary template. I'm still checking internally if that's something that we can share externally. The good news is if you're a client of InfoTrust, chances are you have access to this already, and it's been part of your implementation and work that we've done together. And so just checking if we can share that more broadly. With that, we'll hop into some of these questions that we've got. Feel free to drop more in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can with the 9 minutes that we have left. Um, but Nina, I'm curious, what are the best paths forward if you accidentally store data from BigQuery in different regions?
Great question. So if you are talking about Google Analytics data, the next best step is probably start adjusting your GA4 BigQuery linkage because you can change for going forward basis where the data actually goes to from GA4 to BigQuery on the GA4 UI itself. The only downside is that for any historical data, you do need to create a copy of that to the data set or where the project is within the same region. So there's like a two-step approach of like, fixing how it is going forward. And then historical, you do need to create a copy to a different region. The other thing that I've seen is that some clients do just have different projects within different regions because we're working with a global market and the data set does need to be on like different regions. In those cases, you can create tables that are region specific. And then within your BI tool, like Power BI, for example, you can just have two different tables and then you can combine them together on the BI tool itself. So that is an option in case you do have, to have data within different regions.
Hmm, clever way to approach it. I like it.
Mhm.
Is there a way to see the BigQuery costs associated with each dashboard?
Great question. So it depends. So technically within the BigQuery billing UI, you can see data associated with specific BigQuery service. So whether you're using BigQuery, whether it's associated with like long-term storage or short-term storage, as well as, analysis that you run. You can also get into the granularity of like dashboard if you label your table appropriately and if those tables are associated to a single dashboard because within BigQuery tables you can attach a label to them and then once you have a label within the billing you can actually filter by specific labels assuming that table that is being labeled is just used for that dashboard. But otherwise, if you don't have labels on the BigQuery billing, it is showing data at the project level and at the service level.
Hmm, all right, good to know. And last question for our session, I think, because I haven't seen any more pop up, can you use a service account to connect BigQuery to Looker Studio?
Great question. Yes, that is very much an option, and I can actually show it real quick. But when you are connecting to BigQuery, for example, if you go to data source, edit, you can change the data credential from using your own account to a service account. And from here, you can just enter your service account. One thing to highlight when it comes to using your service account to Looker Studio, there is a service account, Looker Studio service account agent that needs access to your BigQuery project. And I actually have a documentation here. Where basically if you go to this link, it will give you your organization Looker Studio service agent. So then you will have to grant access to the service agent to your BigQuery project. But then within your BigQuery project, you have your own service account, which will be plugged in here as the credential. So.
Hmm. And maybe we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. I'm wondering, for those who may be out of the loop or just not familiar with service accounts, why might you want to use a service account as opposed to your own credentials?
Yes, so it is mostly to make sure that it's not tied to an individual user because people come and go within an organization. So if I use my own credential and then for some reason my email got deactivated, it will break the report. Whereas with service account, it is more tied to a project or the organization. So regardless of who owns the report, it is fully owned by the organization within that service account. So It is easier to manage because it's basically just kind of like a shared credential. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. That's helpful and a good plan of action for when any of us happen to win the lottery and have set up dashboards and data sources here. Um, that is it, my friends. I believe we've gone through our questions. Thank you so much, Nina, for all the information that you shared. Excellent insights here. Great feedback in the chat. Um, so appreciate everybody's time. We'll wrap. Have a great rest of the day.